items. So you see A, B, and C. You look for approval of those at this time.
So moved.
Thank you, Scott.
Second.
Thank you, Ken. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. One abstention, please. Thank you. All right, consent agenda items are approved. Moving on to old business. Second read of policy DJF. Mr. Enlow, policy chair.
Yes, second reading of the policy that was proposed by Jason and his staff to get us compliant with federal reporting. Actually, as we understand, it's going to be easier for the staff to complete those reports and complete those submissions. So would entertain a motion to approve that policy change.
It's doing two things. It's bringing our policy into our practice so that we're actually doing what we're saying we're doing. And it's also making sure we're in compliance with the new federal regulations.
Move to approve.
Thank you, Lorelei.
I'll second.
Thank you, Lindsay. Any discussion, additional points? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. Very good. Policy DJF is adopted. Thank you, Ken, for your work on that. Appreciate that. On new business, item A, consider approve dairy bids. This is Dana Derenhoff, Director of School Nutrition Services.
Good evening.
Good evening.
We did go out for dairy bids and 3 bids were received. The first bid indicated that they could not provide milk on a daily basis, so that disqualified their bid. Then the next 2 bids both met the requirements and one was priced lower than the other. And so therefore I asked to approve the dairy bid to go to Graves Menu Maker. Do you all have any questions for me?
Sure. Any initial questions for Dana?
I see the contract here. And I think we have a fiduciary responsibility to taxpayers to spend their money wisely. But I also know that sometimes price isn't the only thing that matters. And so I do see in the contract that the successful bidder agrees to certain stipulations, and if they do not meet them, the contract will be null and void immediately.
Correct.
And so,
I'm sorry to interject. Could you read those? Do you have copies?
Yes.
Could you read that out loud, please?
Yes. Deliveries will be made daily to each of the 17 school sites, and milk is to be placed in the milk cooler. Under general terms and conditions, it was number 6, an escalation clause was not included, which was something we required as part of the bid. So therefore, all prices will remain firm. As stated in the bid, these are estimated quantities depending on student choice. The Jefferson City School District serves approximately 3,200 breakfasts and 7,000 lunches daily and 340 Y-Care meals daily. USDA requirements are to serve a variety of milk choices, and JCSD chooses to offer skim flavored milk, skim unflavored milk, and 1% unflavored milk. Milks cannot be claimed for reimbursement if served without milk variety offered. Any shortages in delivery that does not allow the district to claim meals for reimbursement, the successful bidder agrees to reimburse the Jeff City School District at the rate USDA would reimburse. The district claims approximately $21,000 in reimbursement daily. Successful bidder agrees that if milk is not provided as stated above, the successful bidder will reimburse the Jefferson City School District for each meal served that does not meet USDA requirements due to milk not being available. This will cause termination of the contract, and Jeff City School District will award the contract to another company. And then that was signed by Cal Graves, Director of Sales for Graves.
Thank you. I just want to make sure that that is clear. We have that on record. Again, sorry for interjecting.
Can I just ask where the product comes from? I'm just curious.
It's Dean's Farms.
Which is where?
They have several plants. I believe the one we have will be coming from Texas.
Okay. So personally, I tend to err on the side of doing business locally. I mean, Graves Menu Maker does have a warehouse in Jefferson City, but I believe they're based out of Kansas City. I don't believe that they actually run business out of Jefferson City. So
But this is their
I
headquarters.
think this is their headquarters.
You do think it's
They
their
have
headquarters?
another location in
Oklahoma.
Oklahoma, but this is their main headquarters.
Okay.
So who's the other, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I do think this is their headquarters. They do
Okay.
have other, if it's in Oklahoma. And that is that delicate line of,
They've got a warehouse in Oklahoma, and they've got a warehouse here in Jefferson City. I'm looking at their website right now. They have a meat plant in Chillicothe and a business office out of Kansas City. So,
I guess my question would be, milk is a perishable item that, I mean, it has a limited shelf life. I guess my question would be just as far as the shipment, delivery, what kind of time frames are we talking about in terms of from the place where the milk is processed to delivery, with it being
That's
not
a
being local?
That is a concern I have. I have honestly, a lot of concern with this. They assure me that they can meet those deadlines and they can provide the number of items that we're going to request. We request about 150,000 cartons of milk per month, and they're reassuring me that they can do that.
And does that, go ahead, sorry.
Is it just milk or is it cheese or is it,
There's some other dairy products, like some gallons of milk, some sour cream, some cottage cheese, and some cream cheese. The other products come through our general grocery bid.
And it's primarily the individual cartons? Is
Yes.
that-
We do have some gallons we use for baking and things, but primarily it's the cartons of milk.
And I'm sorry, that may stay in the contract, but what about date timeframes? Is there any requirement or stipulation regarding the date?
Expiration date.
There,
Yeah,
there is not. That's something we'll have to work with them and make sure that when the cartons, they'll deliver daily. Anything that's expired or not good, they will switch out and leave new milk.
so the person who finished second, they automatically get the bid, or do we have to open it back up again?
I think it says that this
To
will
another
cause
company.
termination and we will award to another company.
So
I
we
don't
have,
know that it says,
it doesn't specify.
It doesn't specify. I guess I would have to ask you if you would want me to bid again or go to the second bidder.
I would think,
As a
given
board.
that you're talking about federal reimbursement, that I think the first thing we want to do is make sure that we check the federal guidelines,
will.
the program guidelines or USDA, if there's any guidance or direction that they offer for something like that, and if not, then we can go from there.
Because the concern would be is that would have to be very short notice. I mean, if they're not providing milk
The
on
next
Monday,
day.
I'm going to have somewhere Tuesday.
right.
Right, right.
and is that, as far as monitoring, what process do we have in place to ensure across the district at all the different buildings that they're satisfied with the products that are being delivered?
I'll be in contact with my kitchen managers daily to just kind of monitor this process.
Does Graves have any other, do we know of, have any other contracts that are for this daily in any other school districts in the state of Missouri?
I know they have some, but I do not know who they are.
So we don't know what kind of
Probably not this
service
I
dairy
don't know what
wise.
kind of
That
service
they're
they have.
providing
Yes,
dairy?
dairy-wise.
Dairy-wise, yes.
That's a good question.
Be nice to know what kind of service they get.
Don't we have other bids with them for other products?
They currently have our grocery bid.
How they
Yes.
been doing on those for,
They struggle with some items.
wouldn't you say milk's the most important item we
Yes.
produce?
Yes, I do.
Can I ask what the savings is?
Over the course of a year, if they provide milk like they say they will, it'll be approximately $75,000 a year.
And the contract term is?
It's 1 year with 3 renewable.
Okay. With, you said I'm sorry, 3?
Yes,
Okay,
4.
3, okay.
Yeah,
So
4.
a total of 4 years, one guaranteed year, and then, assuming that the clause doesn't kick in. And then
Right.
3 1-year renewals.
Right.
And so one day that we don't have enough milk, it costs us 21,000, we lose from federal?
That's the way I read
And
it.
they have to reimburse it.
and it will be terminated immediately.
Right. So they'll have to, I mean, they did agree to the reimbursement.
Have they agreed? I'm sorry, Steve, have they
No,
agreed?
but-
Have they agreed?
They've
Yes.
signed.
They
Yes.
have signed this,
Yes.
correct? We
Did
have an
Chris,
executed
have our
copy?
people signed it?
Yes.
Okay.
Has our legal people looked at it?
We had the USDA look at it.
I did. I contacted the director of nutrition services at DESI, and she talked with USDA to be sure that this is something we could do. Because I have a lot of concern, but basically USDA is wanting us to go with the best price.
That was gonna be my next question is, were there other metrics in the bid that we looked at in terms of scoring or tabulation, or is it cost? Is it cost-based?
It's cost-based.
Okay. Okay. Other points? Considerations? Not an easy decision. I think we have a bid process in place, and it's important that we do our level best to try to follow that. And to Lorelai's point, we have a fiduciary responsibility to the taxpayers of the community to make sure that we spend those dollars wisely. But I think it was Lindsay that, or Lorelai may have made the point that, price is one component of overall service, and the value of an overall relationship. So that's not, I think, the only thing that you have to consider sometimes, but it's a difficult thing to weigh. I do have some small degree of comfort that we have an executed document from them that says that they agree to this, and then I do think that it's very clearly worded, that last paragraph. So good work for that, Jason. I think that's something that I'd have a lot of hesitation if we did not have this in place. So I think that's, I have some difficulty with not adhering to the lowest bid, because I think it puts your bidding practice at risk. I think it opens you up to all sorts of issues when it comes to that. But how do you quantify the relationship in terms of service delivery, in terms of customer service? Do we, is there a place in the bid at all for either bidder to speak to, or bidders in general to speak to, how do they handle the relationship? Do they get to speak to that? In terms of, do they assign one particular person? Do we have a dedicated customer service rep? Or, how do they prosecute issues whenever they come up? How do they deal with that? Do we call an 800 number and say, hey, we don't have any milk, or, we're short on chicken nuggets? Or do I call, Larry Linscomb and get Larry on the other end of the phone and say, Larry, I'm short on chicken nuggets, and Larry says, I got this, we're gonna take care of it right now for you. So,
Currently, we have a sales rep, and currently it's Cal Graves, and he visits the office weekly, and we go over any issues or concerns or things that need to be fixed, or
Okay.
credits or such. They are pretty good at responding to that and changing it around.
Well, this is pretty clear. I don't know that there needs to be a discussion. If they don't come through, they lose the bid.
Well, and
That- I mean,
Yeah.
I would hope
milk is
that-
vital.
I agree.
You
Yeah.
can't,
Right.
I'm sorry, it gets here at 2:00 in the afternoon, that's just not gonna work.
Right.
So
And so
that is very clear.
they are to deliver daily. We've already talked about the discussion, and they're getting a delivery truck just for milk, and will make deliveries to us daily.
Wait a minute, they don't have a truck already?
They have grocery trucks, but we get deliveries twice a week. We'll get deliveries for milk once a day. So they're having to purchase more equipment to make that happen.
Larry?
Well, I think if you were looking at a vendor A and a vendor B, this would already be done and we move on. I think just with prior history of some things that have happened on one side, and the other side, the outstanding relationship that we've had with Central Dairy. That's what makes it challenging. I do think with this document, I feel like as your superintendent that based on our policy and based on the federal requirements and having this in here, I think that's the direction to go. And if they don't meet it, that we've made it very clear, and we can move forward from there, and we can see if they don't deliver, because that's our number one concern, because of some previous other things that have happened that has put some doubt whether they can, and I think we've laid it out pretty cut and dried here. And if they don't do that, then we can do something else. So that's,
No, I think it's pretty clear that the current relationship we have is set the bar very high.
Right.
So that's what we would expect to receive from anyone going forward.
Right.
Whether it's the same vendor or someone else.
Well, and can we include in the motion, if the motion is approved to accept this bid, can we include that we do authorize decisions being made by the staff immediately to effectuate this part of the agreement? So, I mean, hopefully that's understood, that you don't have to come back to us, or you've got the authority to
Move to the
make
second bidder.
Move on.
to execute,
Yeah, I-
right,
include-
to execute
yeah,
that clause.
I think that'd be fine. I think you probably do that by accepting the
And that could be, it may
contract
not,
documentation, but I
it may
think
not
it's
need to be,
safe.
I want to make sure you
No, I like that. I
understand.
think that's good. I think that's fine.
We can pull the trigger immediately.
Yeah. Other points?
No pulling triggers.
Choice of words.
Okay. Hearing none, Don's asked for a motion to approve. And I don't hear a motion, then it's gonna die. We'll postpone it, and we'll move on.
Are the circumstances gonna change?
well, if it did, not that if the circumstances changed, if it did die, I would ask Dana before the July board meeting to talk with the other, some folks that are using them for dairy, and ask what
Okay.
kind of service they've had, and accept or find out a little background information. That would have been something good if we would have had. That's something I would ask if it did die. And we are talking about the beginning of the year. It's not like it's, August 3rd.
But we have a board meeting in 2 weeks,
Correct, that's what I'm saying.
so.
I could bring references back.
And when
Like
would be
that,
the
yeah.
first?
And we
when
can
would-
bring in
When
some
would the
July.
contract be executed, Jason?
It's August 1 through June.
August?
It would need to be decided
July
at
1
the
through
July
June
board
30.
meeting at the latest, I would say.
So could
Okay.
you,
So you do have an,
could you check their references on this particular item and check with the USDA about what our guidelines are as far as accepting lowest bid versus accepting some service concerns?
Okay.
Perhaps, I don't know if the board.
I'd
like to
that
know-
I think
idea.
With special attention to districts our size.
Yes.
And special attention to districts in this area that, again, we're talking about the distance from their processing. I mean, those are the things that come to mind,
time of delivery.
the scope and size of our district and the location, distance away instead of local,
Okay.
are the things that I would want to hear from references.
I think this is an important enough contract to award that, I mean, I agree with the points that have been made. I would encourage us to table this until the July business meeting to give staff the opportunity to do the diligence that you all are recommending.
I'd make a motion that we table it and ask for additional research.
I'll second that.
Okay, thank you, Ken. Thank you, Scott. Good. Any other points? All right, so we have a motion to table item A under new business, and we have a second. So all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. Very good, thank you. Item A is tabled. We'll bring that back in front of us at the July board meeting with some further information from Dana and company. So thank you all.
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your
Thank
work
you,
on
Dana.
this.
Thank
thus
you.
far. Thank you. Moving on, item B, consider and approve change order number 1 for the Simonton roof. Mr. Weber, good to see you again,
evening.
Bob.
Good evening. Appreciate allowing this to be put on the agenda with short notice. Last week when we were starting to do the tear off of the roofing project at Simonton, we found that the roofing membrane was on top of another roofing membrane, and the lower membrane had some asbestos containing material, which we didn't pick that up in the sampling. So the change order is to properly remove and dispose of the asbestos. It's a cold tar pitch, they call it. roofing membrane. The section we're doing is above the media center of the library. And that dollar amount is $34,482, which still brings this job in about $20,000 less than what we had budgeted. Of course, we would have been $50,000 less if we hadn't found this. So, but anyway, we didn't allow them to start work till after summer school, and of course we've got an August 1 deadline. So waiting till the July 11th meeting would really put us in a situation to get done. So,
Move to approve.
I
Thank you,
second.
Lorelei. Thank you, Lori.
thank you.
Any discussion? Questions for Bob? Very good. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay.
Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Bob.
Thank you, Bob. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Bob.
Item C, budgeted, the
It's just for
budget
me?
for fiscal year 19, Mr. Hoffman. Jason, before you get going on this, thank you. I know I speak for everybody up here. I know that putting together the budget every year is a big task. There's a lot of different moving parts, especially when you bring a second high school on board. And so I know this year has been an additional challenge, so thanks for all the effort that you put in.
I'm sure the online crowd is huge right now.
Riveting.
You never know.
So, the two new board members, you will hear me over and over and over that the first thing you need to do if you're going to make a good budget for next year is to make this year's budget as accurate as possible. So that's why, one of the reasons why we amend the budget every year is we have more information today than we did this time last year when we were writing this year's budget. And so since almost everything we do repeats itself, we're going to have kindergarten classrooms again next year. So we know how many kindergarten teachers we had, we move them forward and we make adjustments to what's different. We're going to have electricity in classrooms. I mean, almost everything we do repeats itself. So we look at this year, we move everything forward and talk about what's different. So we began the year thinking we were going to have about a $500,000 surplus and 23% fund balances. This is our fourth budget amendment. You have in your packet amending property taxes down. I'm a little bit disappointed in the Prop C. Proposition C is a sales tax that's collected statewide. It's paid to us on a per pupil basis. We get guidance from DESE on how that's coming, and all year long they kept saying, we're going to hit the target, we're going to hit the target, we're going to hit the target, even though when I was looking at our collections, we were running below where we were prior years. Then in May, in the May memo we get from DESE, they said, oh, we were wrong, we're not going to hit the target. So we amended, this amends the budget for Prop C down. Well, since this went out, we've received our payment in June and they hit the target. So we're amending the budget down at this time, but we actually got as much as they told us we were going to get all year. Interest income, I'm finally right that interest rates are going up. So I'm just early. I was just early.
That's right.
So we received more in revenue, local food service. I don't want to read all of these, just try and pick some of the highlights. We know what we're getting in a lot of these, so we have actual payments, actual collections. So we're amending it up by $49 million, but if you look for almost all of that is in the bond proceeds. So it's moving the operating revenue up a little bit. As far as the expenses, we moved some equipment to supplies. Work comp premium was higher. As we getting closer to the end of the year, we see where salaries and benefits are, so amending those down, salaries and benefits down. Professional development, so these are just final payments, getting everything in line. So amending expenditures down by $87,000, and then our property taxes for our debt service, it's amending that down. So the new updated, so we're now expecting a $1 million surplus versus a $500,000 surplus, like we thought at the beginning of the year. Expenses went up though, so we were at a 23% fund balance, so it's basically the same. So just looking for a motion to amend the budget. So what we're doing today is we're amending to actual, and we'll come back and show you where we ended up. But this is our best guess when I did this a week ago.
And we're still not considering any of the Ameren money.
Not considering any of the Ameren money.
Like off the table.
That's correct. And I talk about that a little bit in my presentation about next year's budget.
I move to approve the amended budget.
Second.
Thank you, Lorelei. Thank you, Ken. Any additional comments, questions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. You're good? Budget's amended?
All right, so that was the first step. Now we're on to next year's budget. Obviously, our operating reserves, we're going to talk about that at the beginning, and then we're going to talk about that at the end, but you have to know how much do you want at the end of the day, and so you have to know a goal where you need to be at the end of the day. So we started with the end and then back up and work our way there. So then we'll talk about our revenues and expenses, and then talk about some of the stuff with the bond and levy. So our reserves, like we just approved, we're expecting to end just under 23%. Next year, we're projecting, the budget that you have before you is projecting about a $1.5 million surplus. So that'll move the fund balances to almost 24%. The board has a goal, and the audit committee, we reaffirmed that goal recently, that we have a goal that we need to keep 20% of our in reserve, 20% of our annual expenses, we need to keep that in reserve. And how we came up with that is first was a cash flow. You'll see in a minute that we get almost 50% of our revenues to operate the district from property taxes. Well, this is our fund balance as of June 30th, and we don't get our property taxes till January. So we need to operate 6 months without receiving about 50% of our revenue. So looking at cash flow, we need 13% reserve just to cash flow payroll.
So you mentioned that in the summary. Is that typical? I mean, is it that way everywhere? 'Cause
No,
Kind
it's-
of like you look like our district is unique in that regard. And why is that?
It is very unique. Well, we have a lot of stuff. We have more stuff to tax than a lot of other districts. So the way the foundation formula works, it says, and we've had different iterations of the formula, but they all basically say the same thing. They run through a formula that says, how much money do you need to operate a school district with state and local money? And then they back out the local money. And under the old formula, we were considered very wealthy with local. So we got hardly any state aid. We were considered hold harmless. And then the new formula came on board, which the new formula is 12 years old now.
Still called new though.
It's still called the new formula.
Yeah, like our new
Middle school.
Yeah, right. It treats us differently, so we're on the formula, so we get, the new formula treats us much better than the old formula did. But it's still, that's pretty much the factor, because like you take so like Blair Oaks, they're a really good example. They have a lot of houses and not much industry. So the tax base just isn't there. So the way the formula treats them, here's how much you need in state and local, there's hardly any local to take away. The state has to kick in a lot more to them. So they get a lot more state aid per pupil. So if you looked at their balance, they're probably 50% state, 25% local. So they're probably exactly flipped from us.
And when do they get that money?
They get it monthly. So if you get state aid, you
And
get
so
it
we have to wait 6 months.
you get 1/12 of your state aid every month.
And so we're waiting on the local. I guess, but I mean, do other districts that get the local, do they have to wait
Oh,
until
yeah.
the end of the
No,
year?
no,
So
no, that
they'll-
is-
None of the
Everybody
That's
pays in
locals,
consistent.
January and
none of the locals pay earlier than that then?
Right.
That's right, okay.
Right.
And it's basically this, from prior districts as well that I've been in, that you're basically saying, if you want to live in an area that, as far as a higher tax base, the way the formula is, if you don't need it as much. So, because you have other industry
Yeah.
versus we're going to pay you so much on a per child basis.
But that's why we have to hold so much back. As
Yes.
of July 1st, we have
carry
cash
over- to
get us
carry it
through.
over.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so there are a lot of factors that go into the percentage. If you're a smaller district, you probably need a larger percentage because a one-time hit to your budget would have, like $100,000 hit to our budget is a lot less severe than a $100,000 hit to Blair Oaks' budget. So they probably need a little larger fund balance to cover one-time bad events. So we need 13% just for cash flow, so then we keep another 7% as our cushion. So that's how we've looked at 20%. And so it's really important because you need enough there to operate and provide stability, but you don't want so much there that you're not providing all the services that you need. I mean, it's money that's been given to us to educate children instead of just hoarding
Earning interest on
and
it.
seeing how much money we can collect.
Yeah.
Right.
So here's a breakdown of where our money comes from. 48.9% from property tax, 23% state, 9.7 federal, 9% Prop C, and then other local and county, and we have a tiny little bit of other. So like with expenses, with salaries and benefits making up 80%, if you look at this, if we can figure out how much we're getting in property taxes, state aid, and Prop C, that's pretty close to 80% of our revenue. So obviously we're gonna start with the big one, 50%. So this one's a really easy calculation. You take the district's assessed valuation divided by 100 times your tax rate times some type of collection rate. The difficulty comes in that is a really important piece. So that almost $0.3 million of assessed valuation, that's a super important number for us to create a budget. We have to have a budget by June 30th. The county doesn't have to report that number to us until July 30th. So it's pretty much an educated guess. And I have a good relationship with Chris Estes, and he shares as much information as he has, but he doesn't have a good number yet. So in talking to him, we think we can safely assume $10 million of new construction. So every other year, so every odd numbered year, so when we're talking about assessment years and tax years, it's different than our fiscal year. So this is the 2018 tax year, because this is going to be billed, we're going to have a tax rate in August, it's going to be billed in October, paid in January, but it's based on 2018. So this is a non-reassessment year, it's an even numbered year. So in reassessment years, in the odd numbered years, they take all the existing property in the district and then they're supposed to reevaluate all of it and say this has gone up or down in value. So in reassessment years, in normal times, you see property values going up. But in a non-reassessment year, the way it's supposed to work is all the existing property doesn't change. Now, I've heard some people in Callaway County that they've done some reassessment in Callaway County this year, and I don't know why. I know the county they have metrics that they're supposed to meet, that the properties are valued close to appraised value and they're out of compliance, so they're trying to get everything reassessed. So I don't know how that's going to work, because Callaway County makes up about 10% of our assessed valuation, so knowing that number and any change isn't as important as knowing the Cole County piece. So we're not, in this budget, we're not planning for any reassessment. So we're only expecting the $10 million of new construction that would happen in the district, and then changes in personal property. That happens every year. So Otto's personal property depreciates unless you're buying new, so in an economy, you see it up. So this $1.3 billion does include said that collection not getting
Went up 30.
the last 4 average 1.3. We had a low less by tax rate. Going through this sense more year. Years, your roll you have year. When with a little cushion. We're going to this year 2021. A big. We normally when long large we'll have some that small that's a goes into that. We receive fines and forfeitures. There's a state assessed railroad and utilities, and then county stock insurance are the main ones for operating revenues. So county stock insurance, this is an interesting revenue. We get more of this than any district in the state. It's based on insurance premiums that are domiciled within the state of Missouri. And so the only thing I can think of is there are a lot of insurance companies that claim Nexus as with Jefferson City as their home base in Missouri. So we get a lot. The problem is when I talk to the Department of Revenue, they will not share with me how to calculate this because it's too identifiable to the taxpayers. So they can't release who's paying it, how it's collected. And so I put all these numbers up there just so you can see how volatile it is. It was 1.8, dropped to $500,000, back up 300,000, then looks like we've got a trend growing, then it drops 700,000, starts growing again. So again, it looks like we have a trend that it's growing. I'm just nervous that I don't really have any way of calculating this. So the really good thing about this revenue is we receive it by the end of August. So if we have to make adjustments, we are able to make adjustments in the year. Interest income, You can see we used to get some money in interest income. We got $1.7 million in fiscal year 7, and it got down. It's been $350,000. You can see it's starting to go up, and this year's budget calls for a $100,000 increase in interest income next year.
Looking for a couple more rate hikes this year.
Well, if we didn't have the first 2 rate hikes for the first 6 months, so just keeping it the same should be increases. So then Prop C, I mentioned it a little bit, it is a 1% dedicated sales tax. It was passed in 1982, and when it was passed with the caveat that half of the 1 cent was going to go to schools as new money. The other half was going to go to reduce property taxes. So if you look at our tax rate calculation, we have a thing called a Prop C rollback. So this is exactly how it was intended to do. So we have an authorized levy of 40, let's say 430. We take half of our Prop C revenue that we receive, and it then rolls back our local property taxes. So we have a line called Prop C rollback. Then we do a voluntary rollback, and then you come up with our levy, and then you add the debt service levy on. So there are 524 school districts in the state since 1982. Since 1982, all but 47 districts in the state have voted to waive that. So there are only 47 districts in the state that have that line when they do their tax rate calculation that says Prop C rollback, and we're one of the 47. So it causes a little bit of volatility. If you remember back in during the housing crisis, sales tax revenues in the state declined. So what that meant was our Prop C rollback declined. So that gave us the authority to tax more. And at that time, we didn't feel like when America was in a financial crisis, we need to be taxing our patrons more, especially when we were getting federal ARA funds and other things. So we did a lot of different creative things so that we didn't raise our tax rate, even though we did have that authority. So I told you earlier during the budget amendment, we just amended the budget down. We were up around 990, and so DESE's guidance that we got at the end of May was to adjust it down to 975, and then they paid us on 990. So next year, if we get an appropriation in the budget, and as long as that revenue comes in, it has to come to us. It can't go anywhere else. But if we receive more than that, they can't distribute it. They have to hold it over for the next year. So 1,010 is basically the amount that we're going to get if what was appropriated, if it's all collected. And you can see that you just take that amount times your prior year weighted average daily attendance. So that's a number that's from the foundation formula. It's a known thing. Here in a couple weeks, we'll have our this year's weighted ADA calculation done, so that'll be a known number. We just have to watch sales tax collections next year. So showing an increase in Prop C revenue.
So does the formula also include a portion of the calculation related to free and reduced lunch?
Yes.
Because I know in your summary you mentioned that it appeared that we were gonna that was going to increase. So does that factor in? Is that factored in here?
So it'll factor in next year. So it's the prior year weighted ADA.
Okay.
So next year our weighted ADA will go up because of the free and reduced lunch.
Because of the increase.
And so then we'll see that in Prop C the next year. We'll have more weighted ADAs to be paid Prop C revenue on.
Okay.
So that's this next slide is talking about all the moving parts. So I told you that what makes up 50% of our budget is our assessed valuation and our tax rate, the local property taxes. So this is 23% is the foundation formula, and it is not as simple a calculation. There are a number of moving parts. So you have ADA. Under the old formula, you had average daily attendance. How many hours of attendance did you have in the year divided by your school calendar? If one person was 100% in attendance, that was how you figured ADA. And then you added on summer school ADA, and that was the end of it. So this formula has weighted ADA, and that's where the free and reduced lunch comes in. And so the way the formula works, they come up with a state adequacy target, which I have here. So this is what the state has said is required to provide an adequate education in the state. And so full funding of the formula is $6,308 is the amount required to adequately educate students in Missouri. And then you multiply that by your weighted ADA. So you take your ADA, and then built into the 6308 is a certain percentage of those. So that comes from a group of districts that score 100% on the annual performance review. So they say they're scoring 100%, they must be doing an adequate job. So those districts spend 6308 in this amount of money. And then, but they have, part of their district is made up of free and reduced lunch students. So that's the threshold. If you are below this threshold, they figure that that's already figured into the 6308, that you have this many free and reduced lunch students. So that's already covered. If you exceed that threshold, you then get a weighting and you get extra revenue. So those thresholds are readjusted every 2 years. And the threshold for next year goes from 36%. So if you're at 50%, your first 36%, you don't get any extra money. You get extra money for the 14% then above the 36. Well, next year it's dropping to 31.4. So instead of getting 14% of your students counted, now you're getting 18.5% of your students counting. So just if nothing changes, we're going to get additional students running through our weighted ADA formula because we certainly exceed the 36%. So that's one of the factors. They have a regional cost factor called the dollar value modifier. Ours isn't changing, it changes annually. There's fines and forfeitures is the only moving deduction, and it didn't change. We have an increase in summer school attendance this year. Our instructional team did a great job of putting a good product out there and recruiting kids to come, and we actually got an increase in students, so that was great. Well, with that comes additional state aid. And then we've talked about it before, that we're adding pre-K to the formula next year. So we'll get funding for our 105 pre-K students that we've been paying for out of Title I funds. So that all of those things combine to generate an additional $1.5 million of state aid. Federal funding. There's a lot of talk about federal funding, but we get less than 10% of our budget from federal funding, and then about $4 million of it. So that's probably half of that is from federal food service. So when you talk about hearing about Title I money going away, it's important. It's $2 million, but there's a lot more talk and strings attached to that $2 million than anything else that we do. IDA is federal special education reimbursement. That's supposed to be reimbursed at 40% of our expenses, and I think we're at about 12. But those, so there are a lot of other smaller federal revenues, but 86% of our federal money come from those three. Is there any questions about the revenues and that part of the budget before we jump into expenses? So that part's a pretty lonely job. There's not as many people helping with that, but I get a lot of ideas on how we spend it.
No.
So next year, right now the budget, and I didn't do this on purpose, but it's just under $200 million for next year. The reason
You're good.
The reason it's so high, though, obviously, is 90 million of that is with the bond project. And we have a draw schedule. I don't know exactly if it's going to be 90 million, but we've had Navholz and architects help us with a draw schedule on what we could expect to be spending each month. So that's what we have right now, and we'll adjust that if we need to. But we won't be done spending by June 30th of next year. Also included in that is almost $12 million to pay principal and interest and fees with our general obligation debt. And then what we do to operate is our daily operations of salaries and benefits and supplies, services, 95 million. And then there's an additional 1.1 million of student activity money that students raise money for running of clubs, and actually when we currently run all of our gate through student activities. So there's a 1,150,000 of revenue and expenses that offset each other, and they're in a separate fund. So told you almost 80% of our budget is done in salaries and benefits. That's true in almost every school district. They're all in the upper 70s to low 80s, and the thing that would cause it to vary is how many services do you purchase. So we purchase transportation and substitute services. So they're a purchase service for us, but most of that is in salaries and benefits. So if we were running those ourselves, we would be over 80% in salaries and benefits. So then supplies and utilities, and then purchase service make up the other 21%. So in March, we did a preliminary budget and gave preliminary raises. So at that time, we approved operating the teacher salary schedule with vertical and horizontal step movement. We added $500 to the teacher salary schedule. That equated to a 2.9% average raise, which was then given to all classifications of employees except for central office administrators, who got 1.8%. That moved our base teacher pay to $36,500. And at that time, the information we had did not have full funding of the foundation formula. It had the governor's budget, which was about $50 million increase, and to fully fund the formula was a $98 million increase in the state budget. And what happened at the end of the year is they did fully fund the formula. So the state got another $48 million, and I believe for us it was about $650,000 additional dollars because they fully funded the formula. So we said at that time that if they did that, we would like to continue to look at our salaries. So what is in this budget and is recommended is to add an additional $400 to the teacher salary schedule. So that's a $900 in total plus the step movement. That equates to 3.8%. So we're recommending that same 3.8% to all classes except 2.8% for central office administrators. That moves our base teacher pay to $36,900. And so this is something we look at a lot. You know, we have a goal that we would like to have the best compensation package in central Missouri. We know we can't compete with the metro areas, but if someone wants to live in mid-Missouri, we want to give them a compensation package that says Jeff City's where I want to work. So we're always working a year behind. So last year, MSTA does a salary schedule report where they collect salary schedules across the state. We're in a central region that covers 17 counties. There are 77 districts in that region. And this year, we ranked third in bachelor's step 1, so the very top of our schedule. We ranked second in master's step 1, and we were ranked third at the very top end of our schedule. And so here was the number 1 rank, so we were $750 behind here, $1,400 here, and really close at the top. So after this raise, we will exceed where they were last year. So I'm expecting they're probably doing something. So I doubt we're going to be number 1, but hopefully we're gaining ground. We're still a little bit behind on the master step, and then we do exceed also on the maximum end of the salary schedule. Any questions on that? Okay. We also added 16.5 FTEs. And the biggest part of that, I mentioned that we're running pre-K through the foundation formula. And we used to fund that with Title I money. So now this is being funded with state aid. So we can't double dip. We can't also get Title I reimbursement for that. So that freed up that Title I money so that allowed us to hire additional staff to provide additional supports to our 8 Title I buildings, and it also allowed us to add our other 3 elementary buildings. So all 11 of our elementary schools will be receiving Title I supports next year. And so the way it works is they're rank ordered by poverty, where the top 4 get more services, and we have to report this to the feds that by a per pupil expenditure. And so it has to be spending in rank order of poverty. And so the 3 that just came on are getting less services than the other 8. The 4 in the bottom, that used to be the bottom of our Title I schools, are getting less than the top, but it's additional services at all of our elementary schools.
And if I could just interject, I think it aligns with our #1 goal of all kids reading,
Yes.
and making sure that our elementary schools have the supports they need, so it's consistent with that.
we've had some compliance issues in special education. Bridget, we've used some people that were on 550s, and we've paired that up and got one process coordinator, but we really need another process coordinator, and this was actually approved in March, but we're adding an additional process coordinator in this budget. We added 2 admin interns, tech support staff. We've added a lot of devices, more than 1,000, more than 3,000 probably in the last year, and we didn't add any tech support. So we need to add some tech support positions. So this budget has 2 additional positions for tech support, and then it has a half of an FTE for some library media specialist at North. North is continuing to grow, and when you run specials, when you have art, music, PE, and you have 4 sections, so you have 100 and some kids doing art, music, and PE, this is to help alleviate that some of those kids can then do media. It allows us to add a 4th special for North. So this was what Barb requested to alleviate that, and Brandy agreed that is what they needed. Then so we're trying to talk about what's different next year from this year. We know that when people retire from us, if you think about the salary schedule, the top left is where teachers come to work for us, and they retire in the bottom right, and so there's savings when someone retires down here at the bottom, and you saw that, the top end of our schedule's 72. They don't all retire there, but they're retiring at some number higher than these in the 30s. So we realize savings, so we try to account for that as we put the budget together. So a total of $2.4 million increase in salaries, which is a 4.3% increase total. Employee benefits, this is a really good story that we get to tell. 17.3% of our budget is for benefits, so that's medical insurance, life insurance, long-term disability, work comp, PSRS and peers, Social Security, Medicare, and unemployment. And the biggest one of those is health insurance. And so for the 6th straight year, benefits remain unchanged. We still have grandfathered, so if you remember during healthcare reform, if you changed benefits, you lost grandfather status in your plans. Our 2 PPO plans that were in existence at that time are still under grandfathered status. So I don't know how many of those plans even exist. Our broker and consultants say not very many. So rates for next year are going to remain unchanged, and that's following an 8% reduction last year, and then the 4 years prior to that were flat rates. So I went back and looked, and in 08-09, so 10 years ago, the board was contributing $450 a month, and next year we're going to contribute $460 a month. So just think of a 10% increase in that. We spend $6.2 million in health insurance, so that's a $620,000 increase that the board would need to come up with, and that's about $600 on our base that we wouldn't be able to give. So this is one of the things that's helping us do things with our salaries. So transportation, we know we're going to see an increase there. We're in the 4th year of a 5-year contract with First Student. The first 3 years had 3.5% increases. The 4th and 5th year have 3% increases, so the increases are going down a little bit. There's no doubt that we need to make sure we're okay with increases. Their costs are going up. The cost for buying buses is going up. And like I said, it is a purchase service, but they're really our employees. So we need to make sure that they're able to offer a compensation package that helps recruit and retain great drivers. Then diesel fuel, you'll see with other utilities at this time of the year, I usually, unless we know something is happening in the energy world, I always just put a 10% increase for all utilities and fuels. So this has $35,000 increase. We buy 165,000 gallons of fuel each year. We buy in 7,500 gallon tanker truckloads, and so it's been the same amount every year. So then some of the other purchases, services I mentioned, Kelly Services, our property and liability insurance, software maintenance contracts, professional development travel is a big one, and something that's new and we haven't really talked about a lot at this level, But this budget has us actually paying for 2 more SROs than what we did this year. And the reason for 2 is the city has been paying for Officer Weigel, who's at JCAC. They've been paying 100% of Officer Weigel's salary, everything. And they've done that for the last 4 years. They came to us and asked, really, this is a service that you should be paying for. We pay our agreement is we pay 50% of the other SROs. So one of Larry's big things he's been working on is how do we get additional SRO service. And so he went to the city and asked, well, if we do that, will you add another SRO and we'll pick up 50% of that also. So I don't know if you want to talk about.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to with the safe schools discussions, and it's kind of died down nationally, but it will come back up the next time there's a shooting. And so there's been discussions, we've had discussions on whether we arm teachers or not, and I think I've shared that we want our teachers to focus on teaching and learning. And right now we have SROs in all of our secondary buildings, and we'd like to continue that and strengthen that. So if we're going to add guns, let's put them in the hands of those folks if that's what they do for a living. So I talked to the city and basically said that we'll pick up that half if you then pick up half of an additional one. So it's no additional for them, and then it's us in a sense, dollars and cents, picking up a +1 FTE SRO wise. So I got some confirmation today. We're talking with Steve Kroll, the city administrator, that that's what they're moving forward with. Jason included here in our budget. So we had a situation a couple of years ago at Lewis and Clark, and there was a situation where there was a gun, and our SRO that was there was doing some training with the city, one of their SWAT teams, I believe, training, so wasn't able to be there. So we want to make sure that all of our secondary buildings always have, no different than if we have a science teacher that's going to be gone, we want to we'll hire a sub. Same thing, we want to ensure that there's always somebody there. We also anticipate within 2 to 3 years, right now we have 2 SROs at the high school and we have 1 at Simonson. We would like to have within 2 years, 2 SROs at the high school and 2 at Capital City High School. We don't anticipate needing 2 there in the fall of 19, which is 2 classes there, a freshman and sophomore class. But as that grows, and with having 4 classes, we'd like to have 2 there as we do at the high school. So that's kind of down the road, but we're excited about this, and let's make sure our teachers focus on teaching and learning instead of arming our teachers with guns.
Right. Then supplies, we spend about just over $8 million in supplies. A lot of people think we just buy a lot of fluff. 47% of that is maintenance and custodial supplies and food supplies, so actually food that we're serving. So when you take that out, we're just over $4 million for 9,000 students and 1,400 employees. We're spending $1 million on textbooks that was passed in the operating levy, technology. So something worth noting is, for something to be a supply, it's an individual item that has an item cost of $999 or less. So if it's a $1,000 item, it's equipment and wouldn't fall in here. But there's hardly any technology other than real big server type items that's really in equipment anymore. So all of our devices are considered supplies. So then instructional supplies, our library media centers, and then we spend about 1.1 million is on top of that in that student activity area.
So this includes all the Chromebooks and everything like that?
Chromebooks, right? Exactly. So
Does
then
it
it,
include the licenses too, or is that under a different category? Or
we
are
buy them
classifying
together.
that under supply?
we put that in as the cost of the item.
And,
Yep.
and we got the 1-to-1 9 through 12. How is it down into the middle school yet, or
6 through 12 or 1-to-1.
it's 6 through 12? We're 1-to-1, 6 through 12. Okay.
And we're
Then
1
1 to
device to
2.
2.
1 to 2 at the elementary, we want they don't take it home, but be available.
Right.
1 device per 2 kids at the elementary, and then they'll coordinate
Okay.
how they use those.
Great.
So just showing you what's happened with our energy costs. They've been flat for a number of years, and again, predicting a 10% increase for next year. As we open the second high school, we'll have to figure, because I'm not exactly sure how we'll go through that, because I think we'll actually see some energy savings from Jefferson City High School when we take out window units and boiler, but then you're adding a brand
Might
new
have
building.
savings moving from Simonson to Capital
Exactly,
City.
right. So that'll be something we'll look at next year. So school nutrition services, the program is intended to break even. Several years ago, the district was supplementing the food service program by over $500,000. And then over a number of years, the prior director, Terry Ferguson, she worked on getting that down to break even, and then actually, so if you go from a $560,000 deficit where we're putting money in to supplement the program, to where in 12-13 we actually had $94,000 more, that freed up $650,000 for us to spend in instruction instead of supplementing the food program. So both this year and next year, we're expecting to run a small surplus, and that includes them buying new equipment in all their kitchens. So long-range planning, I've mentioned all of this before, but you know, when I say the first thing you need to do to make next year's budget is to get this year's budget, because everything repeats itself. The same is true that we can't just then write next year's budget and say, oh, we have enough money to run next year, we're good. We then have to say, all right, well, can we sustain that for the years to come? And so this is my favorite slide. David Luther, when he was here, least favorite, and I know it violates every rule of presentations that there's way too many numbers up there. But
I can't read it up there and I can't read it on here.
well, you have a full copy on the back, so if you go to the very back, there's,
I know, it's just giving me a hard time.
I like the slide.
thank you. I figured you would.
I bet you do.
She's got
It's all in one place.
So I put it there,
magnifying
and
glasses on.
I put all the numbers there just because I want people to be able to see the history, see the reasoning. And so here's everything we just went through in yellow, and the $1.5 million surplus, 23.8% fund balances, and everything we just talked about. So then what does it look like in out years? So in reassessment years, we're assuming a 2.5% increase in our local property taxes. And then here we're adding the 10 cents for operating the last 10 cents for operating the second high school. So you see that increase. We're showing slight increases for Prop C. We're showing increases for interest income, no change for county, some small increases in state aid, nothing in federal, nothing in other. So you can see what assumptions we're basically using as we're going out longer term. Then you see a big increase in salaries. Well, that's because in 1920 is when we need the staff to operate the second high school. I think it'll probably be spread more over the 2 years, but just for this exercise,
2020
more,
versus
yeah,
1920.
right. We'll have more in 1920, but even more in 2021.
19/20 versus, okay, continue on.
I was with you. I was just waiting for Jason to jump on.
I didn't get there.
You're good.
He's perpetuating his favorite
19/20
slide.
versus, yeah.
Yes.
You disrupted his favorite slide.
Sorry,
Yes.
Jason.
So the medical trust account is still in very good shape, so we're not expecting increases in health insurance for the coming years. Other benefits, as you increase salaries, other benefits, PSRS, Medicare, Social Security, those things are going to go up. We know we're going to have more purchase services as we add transportation for all second group of athletic teams and activities. So we know we're going to have more costs there. Nothing really with supplies, and then the 10% for utilities. So I said we're going to see a big deficit then next year because we can't change our levy. So we're going to see almost $1 million deficit next year. And then when we add the 10 cents back on, it levels back out to pretty much balanced budgets. So right around the 21%. So the one thing I can tell you is these numbers are not what they're going to be, I promise you, but I can't even promise you that next year's numbers are going to look like that. But it's just a good guess and a good exercise to go through so that we feel good that this is something we'll be able to sustain. So I tried to just put the important part out. I took all the detail out, and so just focus on the fund balances. So if that helps your eyes, Lori, that
Thank you. So this is the Lori slide?
that's the Lori slide.
Thank you.
I think I'll title it that.
A new slide.
So it's the same information, just took all the detail out and just focus on the fund balances, which is the important part. Does all that make sense? Any questions?
Yeah, that slide was helpful for the new kids that.
Yeah.
that
Yeah,
need to
we
see
talked
everything.
about,
Yeah.
we heard about fund balances on Friday at our new member, at our new board member
Maybe
training.
Did we?
Yeah. Right.
So that's the operations. That doesn't include capital projects or debt service. So they have their own funds. So we have $1.5 million in the budget for building upkeep. We're continuing to rebuild the fund balances. A few years ago, we redid all the vestibules at all of our elementary schools to get them secure. So we spent our fund balance down. We're in the process of building that back up, and we've got it about back up to where we need it to be. And so just some of the major projects that are going to be happening to spend that $1.5 million, and there's a full list in the back of the budget. Then we also have equipment and technology that we do continue to buy. The capital projects fund, if you remember last year, we bought all of the devices for 1-to-1, 6-8, and to get K-5, one device to 2 students. So that's a big outlay of cash, and then you don't have that for a few years, but then you need to have a replacement cycle. So we put it on a lease purchase. So the principal and interest on that lease purchase comes out of the capital projects fund. So that's in the budget. And then we have the $90 million for construction at both high school campuses. At the end of the year, if we do spend $90 million, we'll still have about $25 million left in the bond balance, and then $5 million in the district's capital projects account. And then debt service, past the general obligation bonds, we've issued all the debt. So we expect the levy to generate $12.4 million. That's about the only revenue we get, is just the dedicated levy. There's a couple other taxes that flow along with it. Then we have some principal repayment. We need to build up this fund balance because we'll eventually get to where we're paying, so we pay about $12 million a year. So we're allowed to have our balance grow to 100%. So you keep 100% in reserve. So that's why we're building this balance up over the next few years. So that's about all I had. It's an extremely exciting time in Jefferson City. I think we have a lot of awesome stuff going on, and we have a budget that can help us get there.
Good presentation.
Thank you.
Additional questions for Jason and Barbara?
Yeah, I didn't catch that. Can you start over again?
Just gonna say that.
You can watch it on live streaming. You could just.
I got a question on
Back
line
up,
1,
get in the line.
page 1. Can we go back over?
I do have just a point of clarification or recommendation, but take that up after, look for a motion for approval of the FY19 budget as presented.
So moved.
Thank you, Lorelei.
Second.
Thank you, Lori. Okay, let me take us back to the recommended increases. So we have 3.8%, as you described, for teachers and other classifications, and a 2.8% increase for central office admins. I know I think in the previous year, we made, I won't say it was a caveat, but we made clear that that was an up to number, that it wasn't an across the board 2.8%, that it was, there was a dollar amount that was represented on that budget sheet, and so that we approved that with the language that we gave that discretion to the superintendent in terms of how to allocate those increases. And that would be something that I would recommend that we would do again for you this year. I think that goes under your set of responsibilities, and that we speak with you on a regular basis about how your team is performing, and I think that's an appropriate responsibility to provide to you. Other thoughts?
And I just want to clarify, these raises are not coming from
Yes.
the
I'm
levy that we just passed.
That is correct.
This
Yes.
money is coming from savings
General
in
revenue,
other
right?
places, which is why we have the money to get these increases.
Not only savings in other places, but as I pointed out when we were in March, they had not fully funded the foundation formula. And so fully funding the foundation formula is why the addition, it was more than enough to fund these raises. It paid for other things as well.
Not coming from the
Not
levy money
coming
that
from
was
the
just
levy,
passed.
not.
Right.
Just want to clarify that for.
And I appreciate that point. That and good operational management whenever you keep the house in order, then you're able to do these kinds of things. So I think it's a testament to the work that you all have put in as the administration. And it shows because we're in a good, solid financial position. And I think we may take that for granted sometimes in Jefferson City. But if you go to an MSBA conference or you have an opportunity to talk to other school board members or other administrators around the state, and they may work in district, that's not necessarily the case. There's a lot of angst and pain and frustration that goes along with those things. So good job. Thank you. That would just be my only caveat would be is that 2.8% subject to superintendent's discretion.
Okay, sounds good.
We look for, when we have a
We have a
motion and a second.
motion and a second.
Motion and a second, so no other points? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Very good.
Thank you,
2018
Jason.
budget passes. Thank you, Jason. Appreciate it. On to the next item of business.
Motion to suspend open to enter into closed meeting by roll call vote pursuant to chapter 610.021 of the revised statutes of Missouri, sections 13 individually identifiable personnel records and 14 records which are protected from disclosure by law.
Thank you, Lorelei. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ken. Roll call vote when you're ready, Stephanie.
Lindsay? Yes. Lorelei?
Yes?
Steve?
Yes.
Lori?